So, um, in 2024, the world saw 56 active violent conflicts, which is just
It's a modern record.
right, a modern record.
Yeah.
And for decades, the way the international community has tried to, solve these global crises has basically relied on the equivalent of volunteer firefighters.
That's a really good way to put it.
Right, like a crisis flares up, the alarm bells ring in a capital somewhere, and a team of these highly skilled diplomats just drops whatever they're doing to rush to the blaze.
Yeah, and it's a heroic model, I mean, truly. But looking at the landscape today, that ad hoc model is fundamentally breaking down.
Just under the sheer volume of it all.
Exactly. The volume and the complexity of global violence, it simply cannot scale. We're actually moving away from treating mediation as this, peripheral humanitarian side project.
Which is a massive shift.
Oh, it reorganizes the entire foundation of the field. Organizations and states are realizing that mediation capacity has to be a permanent, deeply institutionalized core strategic asset. So for you, the mediation practitioner tuning into this deep dive, this is everything.
Right, and mapping out that reorganization is our mission today. We're looking at a stack of recent materials tracking this evolution. We've got official strategic announcements out of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Tokyo, stuff from the Geneva Center for Security Policy, and some contemporary policy research on how middle powers are basically changing the diplomatic chessboard.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. But we're going to look at the mechanisms driving this transition from that reactive lone wolf diplomacy to permanent standing networks.
Yeah, and to understand why this shift to standing capacity is happening right now, you really have to look at the nature of those 56 conflicts.
Because they're not just traditional border wars anymore.
Yeah, right, exactly. They are rarely contained within a single border. They're highly transnational. You've got proxy actors, multinational corporations, diaspora networks, all drawn in.
It's just incredibly messy.
It's overwhelmingly complex. So when you have an environment like that, sending in a single charismatic envoy to, hammer out a treaty over a long weekend.
Right, the classic movie version of diplomacy.
Yeah, that is an entirely obsolete concept. You need permanent teams, formal training pipelines, and regional networks that are already in place long before the shooting actually starts.
Okay, so the desire to institutionalize makes sense in theory, right?
Yeah.
But as I was digging through these policy papers, it raised a massive operational question for me.
Okay, let's hear it.
If we're dealing with a record number of active fires right now, doesn't building permanent institutions, creating steering committees, establishing pipelines, setting up these regional hubs, doesn't that just add layers of slow-moving bureaucracy?
That's the immediate pushback everyone has.
Right, because it feels totally counterintuitive to focus on institutional plumbing when you need rapid, urgent action on the ground.
It does seem contradictory. But what's fascinating here is when you analyze the funding and the political mechanisms behind ad hoc mediation, the reality is very different.
How?
Well, in the traditional model, a mediation team typically only secures the mandate, the funding, and the political backing to intervene when a conflict reaches an absolute boiling point.
When it makes international headlines, basically.
Exactly. And by the time that ad hoc team actually arrives on the ground, the societal structures are often already collapsing. You're dealing with deeply entrenched violence.
So it's already too late.
Basically, yeah. So the explicit goal of building standing capacity isn't to add red tape to crisis response. It is to structurally push intervention much, much earlier into the conflict cycle.
Ah, I see. So you're overcoming that friction of trying to fund a peace process for a war that hasn't fully erupted yet.
Precisely. If you have permanent regional networks already funded and operating, they don't need to wait for a UN Security Council resolution to just start talking to local leaders.
They're already there.
Right. They can catch a localized, escalating dispute and facilitate dialogue before it crosses that threshold into a massive transnational crisis. It moves the entire field away from post-conflict reconstruction and towards structural conflict prevention.
That makes a lot of sense. But that desire to intervene early and bypass traditional slow-moving state bureaucracy, that creates a fascinating operational problem.
Because foreign ministries are not known for being agile.
Exactly. Massive government foreign ministries are terrible at early, quiet intervention, which I think explains why one of the most significant new developments in the field is taking this process completely out of official government hands.
Right. You're talking about Tokyo.
Yes, the Tokyo Playbook.
Yeah.
So on April 1st, 2026, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, or SPF, launched a brand new Center for Mediation Support right in Tokyo. And they are focusing specifically on Southeast, South, and West Asia, starting with about 10 specialist mediators.
And the structure of that center is a major pivot for Japan's footprint in international peacebuilding.
Yeah, because historically, Japan has leaned pretty heavily into the post-conflict phase, right?
Very heavily, infusing capital for infrastructure, economic development, governance, all after a treaty is already signed. But the SPF Center is designed to get into the messy pre-treaty phase of active dialogue.
Right.
And the leadership they selected really reflects that mandate.
Yeah, they appointed Dr. Akiko Horiba as the center's first director. And looking at the sources, she didn't just study negotiation theory from a distance. Her background is deeply rooted in the Thai government and Malay-Muslim insurgency conflict.
Which is incredibly complex on the ground.
Super complex. When you look at her work in southern Thailand, she wasn't just, engaging with high-level state officials in Bangkok. She was navigating the intense, localized friction of religious, ethnic, and economic grievances right at the community level.
And that practical grounding fundamentally shapes how this new center operates.
Yeah.
I mean, to mediate in a highly fragmented conflict today, you need an architecture that allows you to engage with non-state armed groups, local religious leaders, marginalized residents.
Which the government official often just can't do.
Right. State actors often cannot legally or politically sit at a table with those groups without implying official recognition.
Right.
That is exactly why SPF Honorary Chair Yohei Sasakawa explicitly stated at their launch that the center will operate free from governmental restrictions.
Yeah, they're really leaning into Japan's perceived neutrality. They're leveraging their status as a private foundation to operate independently. And they aim to build an Asian-style approach to mediator training, rather than just copying Western models.
It's a huge shift.
But here's where it gets really interesting to me. There's a parallel track happening in Tokyo right now. Because at the exact same time, SPF is launching this independent civil society hub, Japan's foreign ministry is simultaneously opening a formal, state-run international peace mediation unit.
Right, establishing a deliberate dual-track system within the exact same capital.
Yeah.
And SPF President Atsushi Tsunami made it very clear that the private center will carve its own path, completely distinct from the foreign ministry.
So looking at how those two entities might interact, it looks like a coordinated naval fleet to me.
Yeah.
The new foreign ministry unit is basically an aircraft carrier.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Right. It possesses massive diplomatic weight, it can project economic leverage, and it has the backing of a G7 state. But an aircraft carrier is notoriously difficult to maneuver. It cannot navigate shallow, politically sensitive shoals without causing a massive, highly visible wake.
Whereas the private SPF center acts as the speedboat.
Exactly. Because it operates outside official state constraints, it's highly maneuverable. It can zip into a conflict zone, establish quiet, off-the-record back channels with rebel groups, and navigate those shallow waters without the heavy footprint of official state diplomacy.
And that role-sharing model, the speedboat running the quiet, localized sounding while the aircraft carrier holds position offshore to provide the eventual leverage, that is becoming the operational standard.
Right.
Dr. Horiba noted that Japan's perceived neutrality is a critical asset there. However, and we really have to look at this through a wider lens, we do have to acknowledge the inherent risks in this civil society model.
The accountability stuff.
Yes. When private foundations and NGOs take the lead in international diplomacy, you introduce a severe accountability problem.
Because they aren't democratically elected.
Exactly. They are not accountable to voters, and their funding structures can be opaque. Think about it. If a state diplomat makes a catastrophic error in a peace process, there are parliamentary inquiries, there are political consequences.
Someone gets fired.
Right. But if a private NGO bungles a sensitive negotiation and inadvertently sparks violence, the mechanisms for accountability are incredibly murky.
Yeah, that is a huge risk.
Furthermore, a speedboat cannot enforce a ceasefire. A private foundation cannot lift international sanctions, they can't authorize peacekeeping troops, or guarantee the physical security of a demilitarized zone.
So eventually, all the grassroots progress has to integrate back into the global power structures.
Precisely.
And that exact integration problem, how to connect the agile speedboats with the massive state-run aircraft carriers, is what is currently shaking up the old guard in Geneva.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the traditional heavyweight champions of global mediation are realizing they have to rewrite their own historic playbooks to deal with this.
You see that shift so clearly in the discussions hosted by the Geneva Center for Security Policy, the GCSP, in early 2026.
Yeah, I was reading through those debates.
They convened diplomats and experts from all over the globe to tackle this exact integration problem. And they focused heavily on a concept they term mediation synergies in complex global conflicts.
And the consensus coming out of those debates was remarkably blunt. The panelists conceded that relying on one single mediator, no matter how powerful or respected they are, is just no longer sufficient to unravel modern conflicts.
Which is a profound admission when you consider it's coming out of the Swiss mediation establishment.
Yeah, because their whole brand is being the sole neutral arbiter.
Right. The historic Swiss model is built entirely on the concept of the singular, indispensable neutral. It relies on strict impartiality, absolute discretion, their multilingual diplomacy, and the ability to host highly confidential talks within their own secure borders.
Behind closed doors in a nice hotel.
Exactly. But modern conflicts are decentralized. They're often fought simultaneously with proxy militias on the ground and cyber campaigns globally. You cannot simply lock two generals in a Geneva hotel room and expect a comprehensive peace anymore.
So the Swiss are acknowledging that they increasingly need to collaborate and operate in parallel with other actors.
Yes. Which brings us to the rise of middle powers acting as the new bridge builders.
Right. The GCSP research highlights how countries like Switzerland, Norway, Qatar, Oman, and Turkey are really flexing their strategic autonomy.
Because we're living in an increasingly multipolar world.
Yeah, and the major superpowers are often way too polarized to sit at the same table, let alone broker a neutral peace.
Yeah.
So these middle powers are using their specific regional ties and their diplomatic agility to keep communication channels open.
They step right into the vacuum left by great power gridlock. But it's not just about having good intentions. It is about deploying tangible leverage.
Like what?
Well, Qatar, for instance, uses its massive economic resources and geographic positioning to host multifaceted talks. Norway utilizes its long-standing, heavily funded state NGO partnerships. There are even proposals out there for an informal middle powers mediation group to coordinate all these efforts.
Okay, but if we look at the mechanics of bringing all these actors together, it raises a massive red flag for me regarding the actual peace process.
Too many cooks.
Yes. If you have an active conflict,
Yeah.
and suddenly you introduce Switzerland for their banking leverage and discretion,
Yeah.
and Oman for their regional trust, and a private NGO from Tokyo running community dialogue, and, I don't know, maybe a UN special envoy.
It's a lot.
It sounds like an orchestra without a conductor. How do you prevent rival factions from just forum shopping? Like, if a rebel group doesn't like the terms the UN is proposing, couldn't they just pivot and try to get a better deal from the NGO or the middle power state?
Yeah, forum shopping is the quickest way to kill a peace process, which is exactly why the GCSP debates heavily emphasize the mechanics of mediation synergy.
What does that actually look like in practice?
Synergy, in this context, does not mean everyone in the same room talking at once. It means a highly structured, deliberate division of labor, integrating track 1 and track 2 diplomacy.
Okay, so track 1 being formal state-level talks, and track 2 being informal civil society talks.
Correct. Let's look at how this functions operationally, drawing on the dynamics seen in cases like the Mindanao peace process or the various iterations of U.S.-Iran back-channel talks.
Okay.
You don't have everyone mediate everything. You might have a specialized NGO running track 2 dialogues with local tribal leaders or religious factions.
Because they can get into the weeds.
Right. That NGO builds trust and identifies the core hidden grievances that would never, ever be said on the official record. And then they securely pass that intelligence, the true underlying interests of the parties, to a middle power state like Norway or Oman.
Who then takes that intelligence and builds it into the formal track 1 negotiations with military generals and state leaders.
Exactly. It functions as a pincer movement. The belligerents feel comprehensively understood because their local concerns are being heard by the NGO, but they also feel the hard diplomatic pressure because the middle power state is structuring the official ceasefire.
Ah, I see.
When principled mediation is executed through this kind of structural synergy, it wins much wider acceptance from all sides in highly divided conflicts.
That is brilliant. Though, we should probably add a dose of geopolitical reality here, right?
Always a good idea.
We're assuming these middle powers are purely altruistic actors just trying to achieve global harmony. But a country like Turkey or Qatar stepping into a mediation role is also a strategic play. It's to secure regional hegemony or boost their own international standing or protect economic interests in a specific corridor.
Oh, it is entirely strategic. Mediation is foreign policy by other means.
Right.
If a middle power successfully brokers a peace deal, they often secure long-term influence over the post-conflict government, priority access for their corporations during the reconstruction phase, and immense soft power on the global stage.
So it's not just charity.
Not at all. And understanding those underlying state motives is crucial for anyone trying to navigate these multi-actor networks.
Which perfectly sets up the bottom line of this deep dive.
Yeah.
We've analyzed the macro-level geopolitical shifts. The Tokyo private sector speedboats, the Geneva integration debates, the rise of middle power coalitions. But what does this evolving architecture mean for you, the mediation practitioner, in your day-to-day work? Like, how does your actual job description change?
Well, the overarching takeaway from all these sources is that the era of the charismatic generalist is over.
The lone wolf is dead.
Exactly. Your primary professional currency now is deep, highly specific specialization and local knowledge. There is a massive growing demand for conflict-sensitive process design. You can no longer just parachute into a conflict armed only with a master's degree in negotiation theory.
You need to know the ground.
You must possess a granular understanding of the local history, the specific cultural frameworks, and the complex, overlapping fault lines of the dispute.
You also have to rethink how you position yourself in the field, right? The research strongly indicates a shift away from solo acts toward intense cross-border networking.
Yes, networking is paramount.
Your effectiveness is heavily tied to your ability to plug into these emerging institutional hubs. Places like Tokyo, Geneva, and Muscat are building these physical and diplomatic safe haven platforms where rival actors can engage securely. As a practitioner, you need to know how to access and utilize those platforms.
Furthermore, you have to become adept at navigating the state-civil society collaboration we mapped out earlier. Practitioners will increasingly find themselves participating in joint training exercises that blend official diplomats with NGO field workers.
Right.
You will need to master the art of shared analysis, learning how to safely exchange intelligence between Track 1 and Track 2 channels without compromising your sources or violating your specific mandate. There has to be a clear division of responsibilities.
It really requires a completely different mindset. You can no longer just view yourself as an empathetic listener sitting at the head of a table trying to find common ground.
No, you have to act like a geopolitical systems engineer.
That's the perfect term for it, systems engineer. You have to look at a highly complex dispute and know how to design the architecture of the intervention. You need to know exactly which network or hub to activate, when to deploy the speedboat to map the shallows, when to call in the aircraft carrier for leverage, and how to sequence those actors so they don't trip over each other.
And that systems engineering approach highlights the ultimate lesson for the modern field, really for policymakers and practitioners alike. Who mediates a conflict is now just as critical as what is actually being negotiated.
Wow.
The identity, the perceived neutrality, and the institutional backing of the mediator will often determine the viability of a peace process before the first round of talks even begins. So for the practitioner, maintaining a deeply diversified network of relationships across states, NGOs, and regional hubs is the most vital professional asset you can build.
That is incredibly practical advice. So to quickly recap the ground we've covered today, the global landscape of conflict resolution is aggressively moving away from ad hoc crisis mode interventions. We're entering an era defined by highly networked, professionalized standing capacity. We are watching hubs like Tokyo pioneer independent, agile civil society intervention, while traditional centers of power like Geneva are actively restructuring to integrate multiple actors and create those mediation synergies.
And as you monitor this field moving forward, the critical metric to watch is operational integration.
Right. Does it actually work in practice?
Exactly. It's one thing to announce a new center or propose an informal middle powers coalition at a fancy conference. The true test is whether these structures can effectively coordinate in a live environment.
Yeah.
So watch to see if the new SPF center in Tokyo actually embeds its specialized teams into ongoing negotiations in Southeast Asia. And pay close attention to whether middle powers can successfully launch joint shuttle diplomacy in active crises without falling victim to competing national agendas.
The blueprints for this new architecture have been drawn up. Now we just have to see if the foundation holds under pressure. Which leaves me with one final provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive.
Already.
We started by talking about the necessary transition from a few volunteer firefighters to a massive, permanent fire department. We've established that bringing in NGOs, middle power states, and international hubs is basically the only way to manage the complexity of modern warfare.
Yeah.
But here is the profound friction point. At its absolute core, the lifeblood of any peace negotiation is absolute, ironclad confidentiality.
Yes. Without trust that the room is secure, belligerents will not concede their true bottom lines.
Exactly. So as this field transforms into a densely networked web of governments, private foundations, and civil society actors, all committed to sharing analysis and building synergy,
Hmm.
how on earth do you protect that trust?
It's a huge paradox.
When the mediation team expands from a few discrete diplomats into a sprawling multi-agency network holding different pieces of the puzzle, how do you ensure the blueprints of the negotiation don't leak? Balancing the need for collaborative synergy with the absolute requirement for operational secrecy is going to be the defining tightrope walk for practitioners over the next decade.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep exploring the sources, keep questioning the mechanics of these new institutions, and keep navigating the rapidly evolving landscape of conflict resolution.